The mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the kitchen floor, scattering shards of porcelain across the tiles like tiny explosions of truth I didn't want to face. The sound echoed in my ears, sharp and final, yet I barely noticed. My gaze remained locked on my phone, thumb dragging upward in a slow, compulsive motion. There it was, image after image of glowing smiles, raised glasses, elegant table settings, and laughter caught mid-burst. My cousin, Alina, was at the center of it all, glowing in a pastel dress. Around her stood relatives I hadn't seen in years. Friends of my parents, even Great-Aunt Beryl who needed help just to get around these days. 34 people. I counted each one methodically as if somehow the number would shrink the more I tried. 34, and not one of them was me. The photographs oozed with care, tables draped in ivory linens, arrangements of pale roses and greenery, crystal glasses clinking in endless toasts. A celebration that had been carefully planned weeks, maybe months, in advance. And yet I hadn't known it existed until this very moment. What cut deepest wasn't just the exclusion but the timing. Just last month, I had sent Alina a card I'd pressed with wildflowers from my balcony garden, a small labor of love. I'd even offered to help her design her wedding invitations, something I would have done gladly for free as family. But as I stood there alone in my downtown apartment, sunlight streaming harshly through the tall windows, reality crystallized. I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately erased. I sank onto the edge of a stool, the room tilting slightly as though trying to knock me down. My thoughts tumbled back to last Thanksgiving, when Aunt Margaret's booming voice carried across the dining table. She'd lifted her glass toward Alina with a radiant smile. "Vice President at 29, she'd proclaimed. "Didn't I always tell you she'd make something of herself?" Everyone applauded, beaming as if the achievement belonged to them too. Then her eyes had landed on me. Her smile thinned, the light dimming. "And what about you, Leora?" she'd asked, feigning curiosity but dripping with disdain. "Still doing that little design hobby of yours?" That little hobby was the reason I owned my apartment. The reason I had clients across 3 states, including national brands that most people bragged about just knowing. But at that table my words had meant nothing. My parents, sitting nearby, had nodded along with the chorus of approval for Alina. When I tried to mention the down payment I'd saved for my home, the conversation had swerved instantly back to the carats in Alina's engagement ring. Now, staring at the photos on my phone, that memory cut deeper than ever. I could still hear the dismissive tone, still see the pride in their faces when they looked at her. I lifted my phone again, my hands trembling. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay silent, I scrolled to my mother's number and pressed call. My chest tightened as the dial tone rang. She answered on the 4th ring. "Leora? Is everything all right?" Her voice carried that familiar edge of judgment, concern already tainted with expectation. "There was a bridal shower for Alina yesterday," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Why wasn't I invited?" Silence stretched across the line. Then came the sigh. "Oh, that. Margaret thought it was best. You always have a way of making things about yourself, and this was Alina's special day." The words struck like a slap. My throat burned. Making things about myself? When have I ever? "Please don't start, Leora," she interrupted, weary. "This is exactly the kind of drama we wanted to avoid. Your cousin deserves to be celebrated." The room seemed to shrink around me. I realized then that my shoulders had been hunched, my body folding in on itself without my permission. Straightening, I asked quietly, "So I'm drama now? That's what you all think." "It's not personal," she said with finality. The phrase she used whenever she wanted to dismiss my feelings as irrelevant. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. I could hear it in her tone. This exclusion had been deliberate. Planned. Discussed. Something hardened inside me. I cut the call before she could continue, pulled up Aunt Margaret's number and pressed it. My pulse thudded against my ribs, but my hand was steady. She answered briskly. "I was wondering when you'd call." No apology, no surprise, just cold acknowledgement. "Why wasn't I invited to the shower?" "You shouldn't have been there," she said without hesitation. "Alina deserved a day that was just hers. Just hers. As though my presence would poison her happiness. But I'm her cousin. Her only cousin," I said. The words felt brittle, hollow, even as I spoke them. "Listen carefully, Leora. Margaret said, her tone sharpening into something closer to threat. We've all talked about this. The wedding too. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Some relationships are already fragile. Fragile. That single word landed with the weight of a warning. If I pushed too hard, if I made too much noise, the last threads connecting me to my family might snap altogether. I ended the call without a goodbye, staring blankly out the tall window at the sprawl of the city below. And in that stillness, clarity struck. They had chosen appearances over me. They always had. As if to punctuate the moment, a cardinal landed on my balcony railing. Its feathers burned a vivid crimson against the gray sky. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to its small, defiant presence. Then it flew away, free in a way I suddenly longed to be. Later that evening, as I sketched logo concepts for a client, my phone buzzed with a group notification. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the screen. A message from Aunt Margaret. Remember to bring the flowers for Alina's wedding rehearsal on Saturday. Good thing we didn't invite Leora. Less drama. My hand froze mid-stroke. My stomach lurched. For a moment the room tilted and I braced against the counter to steady myself. Then as quickly as the message had arrived, it vanished, deleted. But not before I took a screenshot. Evidence burned like a brand in my hand. The next morning I drove to my parents' suburban home, the screenshot hidden in my pocket like a weapon. My mother opened the door in her gardening clothes, dirt streaking her cheek. She smiled too easily. Leora. What a surprise. Come in, I'll put the kettle on. Inside, I followed her into the living room where she settled into her favorite chair with practiced comfort. Behind her, family photos lined the mantel. In nearly every frame, Alina was centered, beaming. In the few where I appeared, I was blurred at the edges or caught mid-blink as though my presence was an afterthought. I received an interesting message yesterday, I said, pulling out my phone. Accidentally sent to me. When I showed her the screenshot, her expression shifted, not to surprise but to weary resignation. We all agreed it would be easier this way, she said, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her pants. Alina deserves a wedding without complications. Complications. My voice trembled with restrained fury. You mean me. Now Leora, don't be dramatic. Perhaps you should make other plans that weekend. Other plans. My laugh was bitter. While the rest of the family gathers at the Grand Summit Hotel for a $90,000 wedding? Her eyebrows rose. How do you know about the venue? Rachel called, assuming I'd be there. She wanted to carpool. Her face flinched, a small crack in her composure. The silence that followed was louder than any words. Your father and I think this is best, she finally said, her tone firming into finality. The whole family agrees. The whole family has been told what, exactly? My whisper trembled with rage. Her eyes flicked away, fingers tugging at a loose thread on her sleeve. Just that you've always been sensitive when Alina receives attention. The betrayal sliced through me like glass. All those years of swallowing quiet humiliation at holiday dinners. Of sitting politely while Alina's every accomplishment was celebrated and mine brushed aside. You're erasing me from the family story, I said, the realization burning. And you've convinced them I'm difficult, haven't you? That's what you've been telling people. That's not true, she protested. But her eyes refused to meet mine. It is true, I said, standing taller than I ever had before her. And now you want me to accept being excluded, or risk losing the scraps of connection you've left me. She rose and crossed to the window, her back to me. We've been helping with your property taxes. If you insist on causing trouble. The word stopped me cold. Causing trouble? You mean standing up for myself? Refusing to disappear quietly? Her tone hardened. This is exactly why Margaret thought it best not to invite you. Everything with you becomes a scene. I left without another word. Hours later, deadlines whooshed past me, ignored. I sat paralyzed in my apartment, staring at my phone, hoping for a message saying it was all a mistake. None came. 3 days later, my friend Maya appeared at my door with takeout boxes and a bottle of wine. She set them on the counter, her eyes softening as she studied me. You look like you've been through hell, she said. I told her everything. Every detail, from the shower photos to the deleted group message. She listened silently, never interrupting, never doubting. When I finished, she shook her head, pouring me another glass. That's textbook manipulation. They're gaslighting you into believing you're the problem when they're the ones cutting you out. Her words were like water after a drought, validation seeping into places I hadn't realized were parched. They want to control the story, Maya continued. And if you protest, they'll use it to prove their point. That's how toxic family dynamics work. That night I stood on my balcony staring at the city lights. The cardinal returned, perching briefly before vanishing into the dusk. I wondered whether freedom meant confronting them or walking away altogether. Days later, Alina's engagement photos filled my social feed. Her caption cut sharper than glass. Keeping our wedding intimate with only the people who've always been there. My phone buzzed with messages from cousins I barely knew. Why are you causing drama during Alina's special time? And family should support each other. They believed the narrative already. The story was being rewritten without me. That evening my grandmother called. Her voice was trembling with disappointment. Leora, sweetheart, I never thought you'd refuse to support your cousin. The plate I was drying nearly slipped from my hands. Grandma, I wasn't invited. That's not what Margaret told me, she said firmly. She said you refused, that you couldn't put aside your jealousy. I gripped the counter to steady myself. My grandmother, the one person I thought might understand, had been poisoned against me. After we hung up, I stood frozen at the sink, water running over my hands until it turned ice cold. The next week brought worse. My largest client, Hollingsworth Media, sent a polite email canceling our contract. We've heard you can be difficult to collaborate with. We need someone who fits our team culture. 2 days later, Westerly Interiors stopped returning calls, citing concerns. In less than a week, I lost $25,000 worth of contracts. I traced the connections. Hollingsworth's marketing director played tennis with my uncle. Westerly's founder attended Margaret's church. The pattern was undeniable. Nights blurred into sleepless marathons at my computer. I redesigned my portfolio site obsessively, pixel by pixel, as if perfection could rebuild what was crumbling. But the whispers had already spread. Even errands became landmines. I stopped visiting the cafe where Margaret's bridge club met on Thursdays. I drove 20 minutes to a different grocery store after spotting one of my mother's friends in produce. Social media became its own form of self-punishment. Each notification spiked my heart rate, each photo of Alina's flawless life carving deeper into mine. I began documenting everything in a leather journal. Dates, conversations, word-for-word recollections. Evidence. Proof. Though I wasn't sure who I was gathering it for. Then came the anonymous text. Some people aren't stable enough for formal events. Your absence is a kindness. Margaret's voice echoed in the phrasing, her brand of cruelty wrapped in false concern. My phone slipped from my fingers onto the couch. Something inside me cracked open. At that moment the doorbell rang. I hesitated, then heard Maya's voice. I know you're in there. I brought dinner. She breezed in with a bag of Thai food and glossy wedding magazines. Let's plan something worth celebrating, she said firmly. A day that's yours. Before I could respond, my mother's silver sedan pulled into the visitor lot. My stomach lurched. She knocked moments later, her handbag clutched like a shield. We need to talk, my mother said as she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the apartment as though searching for signs of instability. She perched on my sofa, rigid and composed. This has gone far enough. The invitations are printed. What invitations? I asked, though I already knew. Alina's wedding invitations. You need to let this go. This isn't about invitations, I said quietly. It's about years of being treated as though I don't matter. Her face hardened. If you can't celebrate your cousin's happiness, maybe you're not the daughter I thought you were. The words should have gutted me. Instead, something inside me aligned with sudden clarity. I straightened, no longer shrinking. I'm exactly the daughter you raised, I told her. I just stopped accepting the role you wrote for me. For the first time her eyes flickered, confusion, maybe even respect, but she quickly smoothed it over. That night Maya and I sat on the balcony, takeout cartons scattered between us. Come to Santa Clara with me in 3 weeks, she suggested. I've got a shoot there. We'll make it a working vacation. The offer brought tears to my eyes. My family had chosen exclusion. But my friends? They were choosing me. The next morning, sunlight filtered through my blinds, but for once I didn't shrink from it. Something in me had shifted. At a networking breakfast later that day, I spoke confidently about my design business, my voice carrying with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. 3 potential clients asked for follow-up meetings. For the first time, validation didn't feel like scraps tossed from my family's table. It felt earned, mine alone. 3 weeks later, Maya and I arrived in Santa Clara, the Pacific stretching wide and blue beyond the cliffs. She had a photography gig, but her invitation was more than logistics. It was lifeline. We rented a small apartment near the marina, its balcony overlooking boats swaying gently in the water. At a local bookshop near the pier, I met Julian, the owner, with kind eyes and a quiet laugh. He asked thoughtful questions about my design work, never once dismissing it as a hobby. On our 3rd coffee together, he invited me to see the seaside villa he'd restored. "The light is perfect at sunset," he said. "Someone with your eye for design would appreciate it." Standing on that terrace, ocean wind threading through my hair, I realized something startling. Maybe the answer wasn't clawing for space in a celebration that never wanted me. Maybe the answer was building my own. The thought took root so firmly I could almost hear it anchor inside me. What if I wrote a different story for myself entirely? 2 months later, morning light streamed through the villa's tall windows, illuminating the laptop screen where my unfinished invitation design sat open. 18 place settings, intimate and deliberate. My fingers traced the date I'd chosen. May 15th. I'd poured weeks into planning. Not out of spite, not even out of comparison, but as a reflection of who I had become. Hand-pressed botanical prints. Watercolor menus. Playlists crafted to mirror every mood of the evening. Every detail was an expression of authenticity. Julian leaned over, the scent of his coffee mixing with salt air. "What do you think of this font pairing?" I asked, showing him the elegant script I'd chosen against a clean, modern sans serif. He studied it. "It feels like you," he said softly. "Confident. Beautiful. Not shouting for attention." For the first time since those bridal shower photos, I felt excitement instead of dread. This wasn't reaction, it was creation. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. Then my phone buzzed, Aunt Margaret's name flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was ice. "What's this I hear about you planning some event during wedding season? Take down those social media posts immediately." Confusion flickered. "What posts?" "Your friend Maya's photography page. Save the date announcements. May 15th at a seaside villa." My stomach dropped. May 15th. The same date as Alina's wedding. Only last I knew her ceremony was scheduled for June. "Oh, didn't you know?" Margaret's tone dripped false sweetness. "The date was moved weeks ago. Everyone's been informed. Everyone except you." Panic pressed against my chest. Was it true? Could they really have rescheduled her wedding just to trap me in conflict? Margaret continued, her words slow and poisonous. "So you're having your little party the same day as Alina's wedding? Family will take sides, Leora. Think about what you're doing." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. The instinct to apologize, to shrink, rose like muscle memory. Change the date. Make myself smaller. Smooth it over like I always had. But then I glanced across the room. Julian was clearing mugs from the sink, sunlight painting his shoulders gold. Behind him, my designs glowed on the laptop screen, evidence of the life I was building piece by piece. My pulse steadied. "I won't rearrange my joy to fit your judgment," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "What did you just say?" Margaret's tone sharpened. "The date stays. Anyone who wants to attend can choose. You've already made your choice." I ended the call before she could reply. Julian set the mugs down, watching me with careful eyes. "Fiona's wedding is the same day?" he asked gently. "Apparently." I forced a laugh. "But it's coincidence. Do you want to change your date?" he asked, no pressure in his tone, just an open door. The question hovered between us. Did I want to bend my life again for their approval? "No," I said finally, the word anchoring me. "We're keeping it." And for the first time I meant it. The days that followed blurred with preparation. Friends rallied around me, forming group chats, volunteering to handle details. Maya insisted on photographing the event as her gift. My friend Thomas offered to curate wines. Gianna, who had a florist's eye, promised to source flowers from local markets. "You focus on the creative touches," Julian said one evening, showing me spreadsheets of logistics. I'll handle the practicals. Side by side we worked in harmony. Him ensuring travel plans and accommodations were covered. Me sketching place settings, painting watercolor accents, designing menus. Together we were creating something that felt intentional, not reactionary. Meanwhile, my family's messages grew relentless. Margaret sent paragraphs about selfishness. My mother texted, "How could you do this to us?" Each time my friends created a buffer. Maya countered Margaret with photos of the oceanfront venue. Julian handed me color swatches when my mother's words tightened my chest. A week before our celebration, a message from my cousin Rachel appeared. "Grandma's asking questions about why you weren't invited. Margaret's story isn't holding up anymore." I read it twice, uncertain whether to feel vindicated or wary. The next day, Uncle Daniel texted, "Something doesn't add up. Alina keeps changing her explanation." Cracks were forming in the narrative. For the first time, their story wasn't airtight. That evening, my grandmother's name flashed on my phone. My breath caught as I answered. "Leora." Her voice was softer than I remembered. "I'd like to hear your side of this wedding business." For a long moment I couldn't speak. Tears threatened to choke me. Finally I whispered, "Grandma, I was never invited." Her breath hitched. "But Margaret said you refused. That you couldn't stand Alina getting the attention." "It isn't true," I said, voice breaking. "They erased me, Grandma. And when I tried to ask why, they told everyone I was jealous." Silence stretched, broken only by the tremor in her breathing. "I should have known," she whispered finally. "I should have asked sooner." By the time we hung up, relief mingled with sorrow. At least one person was beginning to see through the lies. Later that night my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from my mother, her tone strained but calculated. "We need to talk about a compromise. Tomorrow. It's urgent." For once I didn't feel dread. I looked out at the sunset painting Julian's garden in amber and realized I was no longer the fragile girl they thought they could bend. 3 days before my ceremony, a knock rattled my door. Through the peephole I saw them. My mother clutching her purse like armor, Margaret beside her, her expensive handbag dangling from stiff fingers. I opened the door slowly. "Sweetheart," my mother cooed, false cheer dripping from her tone. "We thought we should talk." Margaret swept in behind her, eyes narrowing at the sight of my design samples laid neatly across the living room table. "This has gone far enough," she declared. I stayed standing as they settled stiffly on the sofa. For once I wasn't shrinking. "We'd like to propose a compromise," my mother began, twisting her wedding ring. "You can attend Alina's reception, the evening portion only. If," her eyes flicked to Margaret, "if you cancel your party." Margaret leaned forward, voice sharp. "2 events on the same day divides the family. It forces people to choose sides. Think about how this looks." My mother's tone dropped to something almost pleading. "Your grandmother is very stressed. At her age, this kind of conflict isn't good for her heart." The manipulation was so transparent it nearly made me laugh. Instead, I walked to my drafting table and returned with a leather portfolio. "I'd like to show you something," I said, opening it. Inside were sketches of our intimate seaside ceremony. 18 guests. Hand-lettered menus. Flower arrangements in shades of amber and sage. I turned the pages slowly, letting them see every deliberate choice. This date was set weeks before I learned about Alina's new wedding date. We didn't choose it to compete. We chose it because the villa has perfect sunset lighting for photography. My mother frowned. "But why didn't you tell us?" I pulled another folder, this one filled with unused invitation mock-ups. "Because I respected your decision to exclude me. I didn't think you wanted to know." Her face paled. For the first time she looked unsettled. Margaret shot to her feet, pacing toward my design boards where client projects hung alongside ceremony plans. "This doesn't change anything," she snapped. "You're just playing dress-up. Alina's wedding is the real event." Something inside me snapped too, but not in anger. In clarity. "I'm not playing," I said calmly. "This is my life. These designs. They're not pretend. They're my profession. The profession you've belittled as a hobby for years." I slid a brochure across the coffee table. 3 national brands have hired me because of this hobby. It paid for this apartment. While you were telling everyone I was jealous, I was building a career. My mother sank deeper into the sofa, her gaze landing on a photograph of Julian and me at the villa. For the first time I saw something break in her expression. Guilt maybe. Or recognition. Were we really that cruel? She whispered. Margaret scoffed, snatching her purse. Ridiculous. Fiona's wedding costs $95,000. 200 guests. That's what a real celebration looks like. I smiled not unkindly. That sounds wonderful for her. I hope she feels truly seen. Margaret stormed out, slamming the door. My mother lingered, smaller than I'd ever seen her. You taught me I wasn't worth including, I said softly. But I taught myself I was worth celebrating. She opened her mouth to reply, but her phone chimed. She read the screen, her face paling. What is it? I asked. Your cousin Deborah. She's asking if she can come to your ceremony instead of Alina's. After she left, I stood on the balcony, watering my plants as the sun slipped low. My heart pounded with the possibility. What if others came too? What if the story finally cracked open wide enough for truth to seep through? That evening, Julian called from the kitchen, excitement in his voice. You won't believe this. Modern Celebrations wants to feature our ceremony. They love the idea of an intimate designer's wedding focused on authenticity. The words struck like lightning. The very thing I had been excluded for, my vision, my creativity, was now the reason strangers celebrated me. 7 weeks after our ceremony, the photos went viral. 80,000 likes. Hundreds of comments praising the details I'd poured my heart into. Redefining modern weddings, one influencer wrote. I remembered all those family dinners where my designs were dismissed as trifles. Now the world was applauding the very things they mocked. My business exploded overnight. 3 major brands requested collaborations, tripling my client base. For the first time, my calendar overflowed with opportunities. Then came the letter. Cream-colored envelope. Margaret's handwriting. Inside, a demand that I decline the magazine feature out of respect for Alina's privacy. Weeks ago I would have trembled. Now I folded it neatly and set it aside. Julian asked quietly, "What will you do?" I sealed my own envelope, enclosing a note and a copy of my latest magazine spread. I'm not competing with Alina. I'm completing my own story. 2 days later Maya called. The showcase is confirmed, she said breathlessly. 30 designers and you're the headliner. An entire weekend dedicated to reimagining traditional design. When the night of the showcase arrived, the restored estate gleamed with lantern light. Artists mingled, laughter rising like music. Maya raised her glass and toasted, to writing ourselves into stories worthy of our lives. Applause thundered around me. I stood in the center of it all, surrounded not by family who doubted me, but by peers who saw me. For the first time I wasn't small. The following month, Julian and I moved into a modest apartment downtown. Smaller than my old condo but filled with light and possibility. My office walls soon displayed prints from the showcase, alongside client work and magazine features. The knock came one Saturday morning. I opened the door to find Margaret standing stiff-backed, and Alina lingering behind her, uncertain. This has gone far enough, Margaret announced, striding inside without waiting. The magazine. The showcase. Was all of this necessary? Were you so desperate to make a point? I studied her face, then Alina's. To my own surprise, what I felt wasn't anger. It was compassion. You think this was about you? I asked softly. It wasn't. It was the first time I celebrated without worrying how you'd twist it. That's all. Alina glanced back as they left, her expression unreadable. For once, I didn't chase meaning in her silence. When the door closed, I leaned against it, breath steady. The choice before me was stark. Spend years trying to repair relationships that had only ever diminished me, or pour my energy into nurturing connections that helped me grow. That evening, I sat with Julian on the balcony, city lights winking alive beneath us. The air smelled faintly of salt and jasmine. I told him everything, my fears, my rage, my exhaustion. He listened without interruption, then took my hand. You don't owe them proof, he said simply. You only owe yourself peace. The words settled into me like stone foundations. For the first time, I saw a path that didn't require begging for scraps of approval. As weeks passed, my life began to take shape around intention, not reaction. My business flourished, my friendships deepened, and for the first time, love felt like partnership instead of performance. Still, the question lingered in quiet moments. Could wounds this deep ever truly heal? Was it naive to hope for reconciliation or wiser to accept the loss? One evening, watering the balcony plants, I thought of the cardinal that had first appeared the day my world shattered. Back then I'd wondered what it might feel like to be that free. Now I understood. Freedom wasn't absence of grief. It was choosing not to let grief define you. I whispered into the night air almost like a prayer, I choose to bloom. And for once the words felt true. The weeks after the showcase unfolded like a new chapter. For the first time in years I woke each morning without dread. My calendar brimmed with client calls, magazine interviews, and invitations to speak at design events. It was dizzying yet grounding. I was finally being recognized for the work I had spent years pouring myself into. Then came another unexpected knock. I opened the door to find Alina, not Margaret, standing alone. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. We sat at my kitchen table, steam rising between us from untouched mugs of tea. For the first few minutes, silence pressed heavy. Finally, she blurted, "I didn't know they hadn't invited you to the shower." I swear I didn't. By the time I found out, the story had already spread. If I said anything, it would have looked like I was siding against Mom. Her confession stung but also surprised me. "You let them erase me," I said quietly. "I thought I had no choice," she whispered. "But watching you build something of your own, I see now that maybe I did." I studied her, torn between anger and pity. She wasn't innocent, but she was trapped too, under Margaret's shadow. "You always had a choice, Alina. Maybe not an easy one, but a choice." Her eyes welled. "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something." A week later my grandmother called again. Her voice was softer this time, stripped of accusation. "Leora, I've been hearing different versions of this story. Margaret says one thing. Your mother says another." "Alina," she hesitated. "She told me you were never invited. Is that true?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I was erased, Grandma. And then they rewrote the story to make me look jealous." Silence filled the line. Then a fragile sigh. "I wish I had asked you sooner. I wish I had defended you." Tears burned my eyes. "It's not too late to see me for who I am." We spoke for nearly an hour, untangling years of misunderstandings woven by others. When the call ended, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because truth had finally pierced the web. Heavier because so much time had been lost. That night, Julian found me staring out at the city, my journal open on my lap. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Not proof anymore," I said. "Not evidence. Just a record of who I am. My version of the story." He kissed my temple. "That's the only version that matters." For the first time I closed the journal without fear of forgetting. My truth no longer needed defending. It needed living. The day of Alina's wedding arrived with a quiet sky, clouds parting just enough for sunlight to fall in delicate patches. I woke not with anxiety but with clarity. Today 2 events would unfold. Hers at the Grand Monarch Hotel with hundreds of guests, and mine, a smaller gathering weeks earlier that still reverberated through my life. Friends texted photos from my celebration, still reminiscing about the laughter, the handmade details, the love that pulsed through every corner of Julian's villa. In comparison, Alina's glossy event looked extravagant, yes, but hollow. I didn't attend her wedding. I spent the day walking by the sea with Julian, our fingers entwined. At sunset we sat on the sand, the waves curling toward us. "Do you regret not going?" he asked. I shook my head. I regret ever believing I needed to be there. Later my phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Half the family asked why you weren't there. The stories don't add up anymore. People are questioning Margaret." I smiled faintly, not out of triumph but release. The truth had a way of surfacing even when buried. I no longer needed to dig it out myself. Weeks later, a letter arrived from my mother. Handwritten, shaky but deliberate. "I don't know if I deserve forgiveness. I see now how often I dismissed you, how often I chose silence when I should have spoken." Margaret was louder. Stronger. I thought agreeing with her kept the peace. "But it cost me you. I want to do better if you'll let me." I read it twice, emotions colliding in my chest. Anger, sorrow, and something close to hope. Julian found me holding the letter with trembling hands. "What will you do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to shut the door forever. But part of me, I trailed off, unable to finish. He didn't press. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me, anchoring me in the present. That night, I placed the letter in my journal, not as evidence but as a marker. Proof that even after years of erasure, acknowledgement could still arrive. Forgiveness wouldn't come quickly, maybe not completely. But perhaps healing didn't have to mean erasing the wound. Perhaps it meant living with the scar and choosing not to let it define me. Months later, I stood on the terrace of Julian's villa, the ocean stretching endless and blue before me. Friends surrounded us. Maya laughing with a glass of wine, Thomas arranging candles, Gianna weaving flowers into vases. My life felt full in ways I hadn't imagined possible when I first saw those photos of a party I hadn't been invited to. Margaret never called again. My mother and I began speaking in careful, tentative conversations, each one a fragile step toward something new. Alina sent a photo of her honeymoon, a handwritten note tucked inside, "I'm learning too." As the sun dipped into the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks, Julian pressed a hand against mine. "Remember the cardinal?" he asked. I nodded. That small, vivid bird had once symbolized everything I longed for: freedom, belonging, flight. "You are that now," he whispered. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't heavy this time. They were cleansing. I lifted my glass, my friends raising theirs in unison. "To rewriting the story," I said. "To choosing our own endings." The words carried into the twilight, a promise to myself. I no longer needed their stage, their applause, or their approval. For the first time I wasn't erased. I was complete.